In fact, let me bring on my guest because my guest, he's the person I want to talk to on this. Alex
Hi,
Krainer.
Jamal.
How are you doing today, man? Thank you for
I'm
joining
doing
me.
very well, and you?
I'm doing good. And just to introduce Alex Krainer, he's founder of Krainer Analytics and creator of iSystem Trend Following. He has worked as a market analyst, researcher, and trader and a hedge fund manager since 1996. He has authored several books, including Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading, The Grand Deception, and Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. Interestingly enough, The Grand Deception apparently has been banned or blacklisted. Look, I'll tell you, any book that's worth blacklisting, I want to read. I'll tell you that. How are you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you?
I am doing well. Thank you for joining me. I'm really happy that you're joining me. Actually, you're the person I wanted to talk to, considering everything that is taking place around the world. I'm going to ask a loaded question, and you can take it however you want it. Why is Donald Trump destroying the U.S. economy and taking the U.S. economy to the brink of stagflation, not just a recession? Why on earth is he unleashing this tariff war?
Okay, so I'm not sure that he's destroying the U.S. economy. That's to begin with, because the United States economy has been on an unsustainable path for a very long time now. And a correction, of course, is well overdue. So, what has happened over the last, I would say, maybe 50 years? We could take it all the way back to 1981. There has been a change of course in the U.S. economy. The credit creation has pretty much exploded. The United States economy has been deindustrialized in favor of other nations like China. The United States has been an importer of finished goods and pretty much a consumer-led economy. And much of that consumption has been paid for by credit. You know, the American people have been buying stuff on credit, including homes, and it's created an unsustainable, unpayable debt overhang. Now, if you need a visual on that, which I think is very advisable, people need to look at that and come to appreciate that. You can go to the Federal Reserve of St. Louis FRED website, FRED, and you can pull up two time series. One is called Total Credit Market Debt. They have changed the name of this series to something else, but if you type Total Credit Market Debt in the search engine, it'll come up with a number. And you will get a curve that looks like that, right? It goes up, and I think it reaches somewhere in the neighborhood of $115 trillion. Okay, so that's the total private and public debt in the U.S. economy. And then you can pull up the monetary base, which is another curve that looks like that, but over the same period of time, it arrives to about $6 trillion. So the very, very high curve at $115 trillion is all the debt that's in the U.S. economy. And the much, much lower curve that's sloping much more gradually is the total mass of money that's available for the payment of all these debts, right? It's the definition of unsustainable. They diverge at a rapid pace. And so all the money that's available for payment of all the debts in the United States economy is losing pace. So at some point, something's going to break, and there's going to be a very severe crisis. And so what Trump is trying to do is trying to reverse this system. He has to pretty much bring the wrecking ball on it. And it's going to be very, very painful for many people. But it has to be done because it's going to be very, very painful for everybody, even if he doesn't do anything about it. You know, it'll break all by itself. Now, when it comes to tariffs, it's 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 widely misunderstood as a phenomenon, and here again the effect of his tariff measures is going to be a little bit different from what is being portrayed in the mainstream media. Namely, let's take a look at Chinese exports into the United States. So let's take Nike shoes, and I got this from somebody who explained it well on X in a short video. But he says a pair of Nike shoes that retails for $100 in the United States costs $10 to produce in China. So let's say if the Chinese have to pay a 50% tariff on those shoes, the 50% is going to be applied to the $10 that it costs to produce those shoes, not to the $100 that they retail for in the United States. So it goes from $10 a pair to $15 a pair, not from $100 to $150. And so then those extra $5, either they're going to be eaten up by Nike in terms of lost margin, or they're going to increase the price by $5 and break even, right? Have the same
They yeah.
Okay, but you see, another effect happens here because American consumers have the choice of ordering those shoes directly from manufacturers in China. So, do you have to buy it from Nike, or can you just order them from China and pay them $15 or $20, right? And get those same shoes with or without Nike brand on it, but you know what I mean.
But the brand is the thing that's important.
Exactly.
You can have two. Yeah, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, so the people who are screaming about the tariffs are people like Nike, people who have built whole business models on the basis of providing consumer goods to the American consumers and importing them from the countries that manufacture them. And so the United States wasn't on a sustainable path. That has been widely acknowledged, and something has got to change. So, whether Trump brings the wrecking ball to this system or he lets it go until it implodes on itself later, pain is coming anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
But what Trump is trying to achieve is he's trying to bring manufacturing back home. And from everything that they have been doing, they have been creating incentives for manufacturers to bring their manufacturing back home in many, many different ways. I could really go on about this forever, but for example, just to give you an example, one of the regions in the world that has benefited the most from the American consumer and the American economy has been Europe, because their whole business model was based on importing cheap oil and gas from Russia, which was firing their manufacturing and technology industries, and then exporting finished products to the United States. The United States and Britain were absorbing something like 2/3 of all of European exports.
Wow.
So a massive trade, right?
Yeah.
Now, even without applying tariffs at all, since Trump took office, and I don't know how this happened, but it did happen, let's say that €1 was costing $1.04. Now, 3 months later, it cost $1.14. So euro became 9% more expensive than the dollar, which means that all of European export to the United States became 9% more expensive, and all of the American exports to Europe became 9% cheaper. So, the competitiveness equation has changed in favor of the United States versus Europe. Then, there's been the blow up of Nord Stream pipelines. That wasn't Trump, but it's a continuation of a certain economic warfare against Europe. Then there's this bombing of Yemen, which makes no sense whatsoever. It's completely idiotic, repugnant, wrong-headed, hard to explain until you understand that between 55 and 60% of all global trade in any given year passes through the Red Sea. And the bulk of that trade is European trade coming from East Asia. Only about 3% of American trade is routed through the Red Sea. Since the Trump administration started bombing Yemen, all that trade got blocked. Europeans have no idea. They're so obsessed with Ukraine and with net zero that they didn't even notice, except their most important trade route has been blocked for a month now. It's been since 15th March. And so, Europe is getting one blow after another. Things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And of course, manufacturers, they're sitting and saying, it's not working out. We're losing competitiveness. Our energy is the most expensive energy in the world. The dollar has declined. We're not making as much money on this American trade. Hey, why don't we switch our production to the United States? I promise you, as an entrepreneur, for the first time in my life ever, I'm thinking maybe I need to relocate for the first time ever. And so this will all happen with a delay, but it's going to burst the credit bubble, which is going to burst anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And it might have the effect of bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And then I believe that with fullness of time, it'll be a relatively easy decision for the United States to join the multipolar integrations. Because rather than being the policeman... Sorry?
No, I'm sorry. I just want to interrupt real quick. Trade from Europe, though, because of the cost of energy and everything, meaning it's so expensive to produce those things in Europe with the increased cost of energy and with the wars and everything else, that they're saying, all right, we have a devalued dollar. Energy is cheaper in the US. Maybe we should move to the US. But you're not talking about like Southeast Asia, China, Malaysia, Vietnam. You're not talking about those countries. You're specifically talking about Europe.
Yes, I'm specifically talking about Europe, but you have to keep in mind that many European companies set up manufacturing in China and elsewhere in East Asia, again, largely to supply the American market. Yeah. So a lot of that is going to be completely renegotiated. Now, he came with the big sledgehammer, and now 70 plus countries are taking appointments to come and say, hey, can we come to some kind of a conclusion, some kind of an agreement? Don't do this to us. And there's going to be some kind of agreements, but it's going to be on bilateral basis with a lot of countries. What we had until now is some kind of a managed progression towards turning the United States into a shadow of its former self, completely depleting it, and then collapsing the American economy. This was actually the plan of the global elites who were pushing for globalism. They knew since 1971, when Nixon cut the convertibility of the dollar into gold, they knew that they were going to inflate the fiat bubble, and that was going to destroy the dollar eventually, and that it was going to deplete the United States, its wealth, its the country as a global power. And they knew that they needed an alternative, which is why they have been driving this deindustrialization of the United States in favor of China. Because if you look at the statements by George Soros, by Henry Kissinger, and so forth, they were absolutely determined to make China the next global cop, to make China the next enforcer of their process of globalization. And for that, they needed to build up China into this economic superpower. And, a few problems happened along the way, because the Chinese let them in. They played the game as though they were going to become their next global cop. But then with Xi Jinping, they realized this is not happening. And so now they turned against China. Meanwhile, they've weakened the United States to the point where the United States can no longer reverse this and defeat China and reassert themselves as a global superpower. And so now they're kind of lost in space. They are, I think, in the in the dying agony. We see the Brits trying to cobble up coalitions of the willing. They want to kill Russia somehow, but I think it's a losing game, and I think that it's pretty much lights out within our lifetimes.
Yeah. I have made this argument that we're at a tipping point. And what I mean by tipping point is the US was trying to assert power in various ways. One, militaristically in Ukraine, and it failed miserably. I mean, for God's sake, even the New York Times at this point admits that the US was dictating events on the ground. Europe and the US was giving all of the weapons, all of the money, all of the stuff in order to inflict a strategic, military, and economic defeat on Russia, and it didn't happen. And now Trump comes in and tries to assert this economic power by effectively a trade war against the world, whereas China says no. And they have been very clear, we are in this to the bitter end, which the Wall Street Journal describes as a war for primacy, effectively economic primacy, where it's a zero sum game at this point because of the way that Donald Trump has effectively tried to do this. Varoufakis, in an interview, made this point of saying that this is a fight for survival, where, and I'm paraphrasing, Trump is biting, scraping in order to maintain, let's say, a US economic order against what he considers to be a declining empire. How do you define that? I mean, do you see that as being an accurate portrayal? Where would you quibble with the way that's being described?
I think it's very, very difficult to interpret those things as they're happening. We will know much more as the dust settles, when the events are behind us. I have a hard time myself deciding, are people in the Trump administration making it up as they go along, active impulsively, and then figuring out how to deal with the consequences on the fly, or have they thought things through, and whether they have a plan that they are executing? I'm kind of leaning in the direction of they're making it up as they go along, but not necessarily because they haven't thought things through, but because there are definitely two opposing factions within the Trump administration. One of them, which is trying to reassert the United States as a global manufacturing power and trading power, and another one which wants to preserve this rules-based global order. Now, Trump, let's say that the earliest and most important policy position statement came from Marco Rubio on the 15th January when he was having his hearings for the state Secretary of State, when he said that the whole post-World War II global order was more than obsolete. And not only that, it is being used as a weapon against us at present. And I think that this is like a vague formulation of everything we've discussed so far. That the United States was being depleted as a global cop, as the economic power that was sinking deeper and deeper into debt to be the world's leading consumer, to be paying for everybody's exports. And I think that this is the core Trump team wants to dismantle this and set the United States on a different economic basis. And then part of the administration are still loyal to this British free trade approach and the process of globalization. Mm-hmm. And so how they interact is almost like a day-to-day thing that makes it appear like they're making it up as they go along, because they announce a policy measure, and then somebody says like, no, this is crazy, we can't do this, look, all these bad things are going to happen, and then they say like, okay, let's pause it for a while, rethink it, and then we'll see what happens. I'll give you a concrete example.
Well, I can tell you, they are making it up as they go along. And I can show you a clip where they asked Trump about this. And he makes a point of effective. Listen to what he says here, because this kind of this is pretty outrageous when you think about
Yeah, go ahead, please.
how aggressive they were with this plan, and then for him to say
Yeah, go
something
ahead,
like
please.
this.
Consider exempting some U.S. companies, maybe some larger companies who have been hit hard in the markets last few days during this 90 days?
As time goes by, we're going to take a look at it. There are some that have been hard. There are some that, by the nature of the company, get hit a little bit harder, and we'll take a look at that. Yeah. Just instinctively, more than anything.
Instinctively, he says that they're doing this instinctively. It's like, what do you mean instinctively?
Yeah.
You literally declared a trade war against the world, many of which of these
Yeah.
countries are allies, or it used to be allies. And
Sure.
they're
Sure.
like, yeah, that clip is outrageous, considering what's happening. I'm sorry. Please continue.
Yeah, let me give you a concrete example of something that's going on, and you'll realize that it is not being discussed along any true terms. It's being masked and dressed up as something else,
Mhm.
but it's really like a three-card Monty and a proxy battle between the United States and Britain. Britain is the driving force behind the quote unquote rules-based global order and the process of globalization. So here's how things transpired in Ukraine. Last September, before Trump was even elected, Volodymyr Zelensky comes to New York, and I guess just in case Trump won the election, he offers Trump a 500 billion minerals deal for Ukraine. Okay, so that was a piece of news, came, went, nothing much happened. Then, 4 days before Trump is elected on 16th January, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer flies over to Kiev and signs a 100-year partnership between Britain and Ukraine. Then, as it turns out, this partnership has a secret appendix, which pretty much hands over the bulk of the wealth of Ukraine, including its ports, its natural gas deposits, storages, pipelines, airports, nuclear power plants, pretty much the cream of Ukraine's wealth to British interests covertly. So it's hidden. This only leaked out from Ukraine's intelligence that there was this secret appendix. Zelensky himself alluded to it, so we know that it's really there. And then here's the problem. This was signed between Zelensky and not Boris Johnson, sorry, it was Zelensky and Keir Starmer. January 2025. Zelensky's presidential mandate expired in May of 24. So it's a problem because Ukraine's constitution is crystal clear that president's mandate is 5 years, not a day longer, and it cannot be extended for any reason. So even though Boris Johnson afterwards, and it was Boris Johnson, not Keir Starmer, Boris Johnson afterwards in I think in February or March this year, went to Ukraine and he pressured the Rada to pass this resolution extending Zelensky's mandate for another 8 months or whatever. This is unconstitutional. So if a different government comes into power in Kiev and realigns with Moscow, they can say, what you signed here with Zelensky is null and void. You signed it with a private citizen. He was no longer the president of Ukraine. He had no authority to sign this agreement. In other words, the pirate raid that the British arranged and the plunder, that the loot that they took from Ukraine is now in jeopardy unless the United States guarantees, provides security guarantee for Kiev. By that, I mean for the government in Kiev that's aligned with the West and that's going to uphold and honor these agreements, right? It's about plunder. It's about pirate raid.
Yeah.
And the instigator, the chief instigator of all this is Great Britain. Now, they're offering Trump, like, hey, if you provide security guarantee for Kiev, for Ukrainian government, you'll have this $500 billion worth of rare mineral earths from Ukraine. First of all, this probably doesn't exist to begin with. You know, there's very, very well founded doubts that these minerals don't exist in feasible quantities to begin with. So he's giving like a cat in a bag in order to give a security guarantee to Kiev, in order for Britain to be able to continue to loot Ukraine for their benefit. Okay, why am I explaining all this? The world, the global rules-based global order, led by by Great Britain, is trying to get the United States to be the policeman to secure this loot for Ukraine at the cost of. So, United States has to shoulder the cost of providing the security. So, it's going to have a cost in troops, in treasure, in material, right? They have to police this. They have to take risk of conflict with Russia, with a nuclear superpower that could escalate into a nuclear Armageddon. And their reward for this are these elusive rare earth minerals which may or may not exist, right? So upside, downside, right? That's what Trump is being offered by the existing rules-based order. They're being cheated in a vulgar three-card Monty by the Brits. Okay,
Yep.
On the other side, he's talking to Putin, and Putin says, we have a whole lot more than what Ukrainians have. So
Right.
the total resource wealth of Ukraine is, let's say, it's estimated at about $12 trillion. Bulk of this is already under Russia's control. And then Russia itself has an estimated $75 to $90 trillion worth of natural resource wealth. And the Russians are saying, join us. We can develop all this together. We already provide the security. You don't have to provide security guarantees to anybody. We're taking care of it. And there's no risk of us going to war against one another. So if he deals with the Russians, the math is downside risk, or maybe downside risk is next to nothing. Upside benefit is massive.
Right.
Okay. Now, this is the reality. This is the economic math of the choice that the Americans are facing.
Mhm.
On the face of it, it will be an easy choice, and the Trump administration will say, all right, we're going with the Russians. We don't have to be a global policeman. We don't have to risk a global nuclear conflict for these freaking minerals that may or may not exist. We can join up with the Russians, develop all these resources, and have peaceful, constructive trade with the Russians, with the Chinese, with the Indians, with the Iranians, with everybody. That's our choice. However, it runs into ideological headwinds.
Right there. Yep.
You see?
Yeah.
So they can't come out in the open and say it, which is why the whole situation is being dressed up into, freedom and democracy versus autocracies, and our traditional allies in Europe and France and all of this is confusing the issues and making it very difficult for Trump administration to actually go where they want to go. And that then brings the United States to a very easy choice. And this easy choice has been formulated. I think it was Larry Johnson who said it, whom I heard it say it first, but I'm not 100% sure. And he said, we have the choice of being the polite guest at the global banquet, or to be the world's policeman, enforcing some kind of an order that they have to submit to.
Right.
That's the choice. And so I think that the pure business math, the pure economic math, is definitely by now in favor of being the polite guest at the global banquet. But the ideological baggage
Makes it difficult.
is
Yeah.
making this equation obscured.
To back
And
up what
people
you're
think,
saying, by the way, Witkoff is saying something very similar, where he is saying, look, we are trying to make a larger deal. And if you notice, Kirillov came to the US, meaning a businessman went to the US.
yes, yes,
Witkoff goes to Russia, a businessman going to Russia. They're talking business. Like
yes,
Ukraine seems to be, I kept saying that if the conversation was about Ukraine, there was nothing really to talk about. The Russians have effectively won this war, and they are
exactly.
not deviating from the lines that they have basically drawn. But if you bring in, hey, we can have this business relationship, we can have a new security architecture of Europe based on trade, based on these type of things. The fascinating thing about this is Europe is not included in that conversation.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so, yes, so you see what Witko is talking about and what he's discussing with Kirillov and what is going to be discussed between Trump and Vladimir Putin is exactly this. It's almost crystal clear what the choice before the United States is, but they can't come out and say it.
Right.
You know, it's a problem because of these ideological obfuscations that, you know, we've been at the receiving end of more than 20 years of solid 24/7 Russophobic propaganda. Russia bad. For the last 20 years, every Hollywood movie had Russians as the bad guys. To now come out and say, and like, hey, you know what? We're gonna ally with Russia, and we're gonna drop these European leeches behind, and we're going to move on because the post World War II global order was actually unfavorable to us. Well, it was both. It was favorable and unfavorable because there was, you know, the United States did get to have the global reserve currency, so they got to import a whole lot of real goods and services from around the world for printed up papers and computer digits. But that also creates a liability later because you have all these 30, 32, 34 trillion dollars of US denominated assets in the abroad, which might at a given moment rush back in and create havoc.
Mhm.
So it's a, you know, like it's a blessing and a curse all in the same go.
Yeah.
But you know, doing a deal with the Russians, which is favorable, and then doing a deal with the Chinese, which would be favorable to the United States, and then joining these multipolar. Because what are the Chinese doing, and Russians are going along with it? The Chinese are positioning themselves as a global manufacturing hub.
Right.
They want the whole global South to be affluent nations full of affluent consumers with purchasing power that can become their customers, right? And so that then we go back to that story about Nike shoes, you know, we can, hey, and now you'll see in the social media, the Chinese are pushing these stories one after another, you know, look, hey, you can buy this handbag for $38,000 in a high street boutique in Europe, but we can make exactly the same bag from exactly the same materials, exact same process, only without the little logo, and you'll pay $1,000 for it. So, you know, it's all the businesses that have benefited from the status quo who are now screaming against Trump dismantling all this. But ultimately, I think that most of the ordinary people will benefit from the changes. Maybe not in the very short term, but not too far down the road. You know, there's going to be increased employment. There's going to be manufacturing. There's going to be trade. And now, if you're in a good relationship with Russia, with China, with India, with Iran, with Brazil, with all of these countries, then you have 3 or 4 billion affluent consumers everywhere around the world that can absorb your production and your manufacturing output. And I think that's definitely a better future then ramping up debt ad infinitum to be able to absorb all these Ferraris and Mercedeses and Louis Vuitton handbags and Moet and Chandon champagne, and then at the same time be spending these trillions of dollars on policing everybody,
Right.
so that they submit to this global order.
Alex, I would tell you, when I have a conversation with about economists, they often ignore the ideological baggage. Now, you did mention ideological baggage that's difficult for Trump to kind of just do what is in his own, good sense, right? We shouldn't be at war with these countries. The notion that we spend $10 trillion destroying Iraq, Afghanistan, et cetera, is outrageous. All of that stuff was just debt. Agreed. I agree with you on all that stuff. I disagree that manufacturing is going to come back to the US in that way. And I also disagree. If you listen to J.D. Vance, when J.D. Vance gave his speech, one of the things he said in that speech was the entire point of globalization was this belief that the US and Europe would effectively sit atop of this kind of economic chain where we profit and they remain poor, meaning that was the framing that they were effectively working with. And countries like China was able to pull themselves out of that, start doing manufacturing, but also start designing themselves, which effectively broke the model, in which JD Vance is like, okay, we need another model where the US can stay on top. I get the sense that this is more about ideological primacy, this notion of we need to remain, if not in charge, a superpower atop of other countries. Like, I don't get the sense that the US or Donald Trump is doing this with the idea of we want to make the global South wealthy. I get the sense that Donald Trump is thinking to himself, how can we stay on top? How can we create an economic order where the United States effectively benefits, as opposed to where we are now, where all of this money is going into other countries, et cetera, China being one of them. And also one other thing, we benefited from that. Like the globalization thing, you might say Soros, whoever came up with it, however they did it, but it's a rational act for companies who were CEOs who think to themselves, how can I maximize my profit? Oh, I know. I can ship manufacturing overseas. I can pay politicians to drop any kind of import tax that is coming in from these goods coming into the country. I can fire Bob and Tom and Jerome, and I could pay, I don't want to be racist about the names, but I could pay somebody in China or Mexico or the Philippines $3 an hour as opposed to the $15 or $20 that they're making in the United States. These things seems to be rational acts in a capitalist system where people are trying to make as much money as they can possibly make.
Sure.
And they just seem to have done this to the detriment of the US in regards to industry, manufacturing, et cetera. With Trump coming in 50 years later saying, hey, this is not great for us. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Does it really require a mastermind for something that seems to be rational in regards to an economic system that effectively compels, pushes, incentivizes people to do exactly that?
Well, unless I misunderstood the question, Jamarl, I think that yes, it does require a mastermind because you need to understand how the system works. And we are never given the truth about the way system works, and well, okay, first to begin with, we have to do away with the notion that any nation is a monolith, right?
Mhm.
So to say that we benefited, you probably didn't.
Yeah.
Most people in the United States probably didn't. And it's easy enough to see it. People's productivity goes like this, but their real wages are stagnating as prices go up. So, there's more and more poverty, there's more homelessness, the middle class is disappearing and so forth.
Just to be clear, I mean the rich benefited. I'm sorry, please continue.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then not all of the rich, it's a very narrow segment. You don't see it in the aggregates. If you look at the GDP growth and all of these things, of course, that benefits some people, but it leaves most of other people
Right.
behind. And then the way the economic system works and the way it's being manipulated, sometimes we don't find out, other times we find out much later. Okay, I'll give you another concrete example, which is I spent most of my life working as an oil market analyst, right? And so I spent good 10-15 years reading oil market analysis by so many expert analysts and institutions and organizations like the Energy Intelligence Agency and the International Energy, there's a whole bunch of them. And I've been diligently reading this, analyzing supply, demand, blah, 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 blah. I'll take you back to 2003. Oil prices were trading in the mid 20s per barrel, like 20 so many dollars per barrel.
Yeah.
And then we had like this big trend, and they reached about $146 a barrel at some point in 2008.
I remember this. Yeah.
And everybody had something to say about this. There were all these explanations about why this happened. I just learned perhaps the key part of that story. What happened? As the United States invaded Iraq in March of 2003, at the same time, the American banking system obtained, by hook and by crook, the collateral of the largest oil field in the world, which is the Alberta oil sands. It was set at 175 billion barrels.
Wow.
Now, to make sure that the value of that collateral is maximized, when they went to Iraq, and maybe that's why they went to Iraq, they didn't go there to steal Iraqi oil as such. They went there to destroy Iraqi oil production in order to pump up the price of oil, in order to maximize the value of this collateral in Alberta, Canada, which somehow got hoarded by the Rockefeller interests in New York, and which then fueled the credit cycle that created the housing bubble, which popped at the end of 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the plan was, we go to the Middle East, destroy oil production. We create a big problem there. We pump up the oil prices because we just obtained this massive amount of collateral, and it was a lot of it was fraudulent. There was a lot of fraud, and it was they've been working on this for many years. It's been since the 1980s. And then, the banking interests gave lots and lots of loans to the oil industry, and then that mass of money became the collateral for the housing bubble, and then 8 or 9 million American homeowners lost their homes. But it was a big. They constructed a big giant
Bubble.
conveyor belt of wealth, transferring it from the people in the from the people of the United States via housing bubble to the very, very top of the banking elites. As an oil market analyst, I've been reading about this and about that, and about the oil sands, and about the fracking, and Middle Eastern conditions, and Iraq and Iran, and this and that, and Saudi reserves. And not one analyst at any point mentioned the relationship between Alberta sands, oil sands, and the housing bubble in the United States. But somebody way, way, way above all these analysts and all these day-to-day events knew exactly what the game was. They scripted the game, they executed the game, and they ended up plundering a massive amount of wealth from the whole society. Now, it may not be easy to believe this, but if you look at all the events as they happened, and the effect that they have, if you were going to plan it that way, then that's what you would do.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So oil price in 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, was $25 a barrel.
And it shot up immediately
Oil
when they
price,
did it.
oil price when the housing bubble popped was $146 a barrel. So they were successful in bumping up the price of oil, which bumped up the value of this collateral, which was in Canada, but became the collateral of the New York Rockefeller interests. And then they used that to push subprime mortgages on people all across the United States, because that too was an asset. Then they repackaged it and they sold it. They made up like bandits. They created like a $9 trillion housing bubble, and people lost wealth. Middle East was
Destroyed.
destroyed and flowing in blood up to their knees, but the bankers made out like bandits, and we didn't know, did we? We didn't.
But you don't accept the ideological version of this with the George Bush, people around him, the Dick Cheneys of the world, thought that they can reshape the Middle East using American power to do so, considering that Russia couldn't necessarily, meaning Soviet Union had collapsed. The United States was the only superpower. George Bush and his people, in fact, I can't even think of the name of the document, but I think it
Project
was
for the New American Century, right?
Project for the New American Century.
Yeah.
Thank you. Like where this is an ideological project, where they were doing this with the idea. In fact, when Wesley Clark points out they wanted to go into all of these countries, with Iran being the last country, with the idea of being reshaping the Middle East with American
Sure.
might.
Yeah.
That's an ideological framing. But you don't, I guess what I'm asking is,
No, I don't reject it, because I have been perfectly aware of all this for many years now. I know about Wesley Clark. I know about the project of. I learned about the Project for the New American Century about a century about 3 weeks after 9/11 happened.
yeah.
Which
So,
I
but
felt
you
like,
think they
oh
dovetail?
my God, this is
Yeah.
this is why this is going on. But and of course, ideology. When you want to change society, a revolution or war or whatever happened, you basically need three main ingredients. You need charismatic leaders, you need compelling ideology, and you need some triggering event, some kind of
Like a 9/11.
like 9/11, exactly. So was George W. Bush a charismatic leader? Well, they kind of built him up to that. The Project for the New American Century might have been the ideological backdrop, but the objective is always to do with plunder of wealth,
Yeah.
not just from around the world, but also from your own domestic populations. Because let's face it, the banking, the money lender oligarchies, they are equal opportunity pirates. They
Yes,
don't
they are.
make a difference between foreign populations and domestic population. For them, we're all hackable animals. We all serve our purpose, and when we're no longer useful, then we become useless eaters, and they want to be rid of us.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that the ideology is probably one step down in the real reasons for global events. Ideology is there to align the forces towards achieving certain objectives. But the money lending oligarchies, they don't care about ideology. They needed the United States to do this work in the Middle East, but they were going to drop the United States behind and switch to China as their global cop at a later stage anyhow. So it wasn't out of any attachment to the idea that the United States will be the sole superpower in the world, and that we're going to have the New American Century, and there's going to be full spectrum dominance and blah, blah, blah. They don't care about any of this. But that kind of stuff is useful to motivate the people at the Pentagon, in the military hierarchy, in the diplomatic corps, in the politicians who can thump their chest and say like, we're number one, we're the best, and we should rule the world, and so forth. So that's what the ideology is for. I don't think that ideology in itself is necessarily the highest level incentive for these things.
I see. Cash. How can we maximize? How can we make money? Basically, I mean, look, I would agree with you that they created a bubble of cash out of effectively thin air the moment that they went into the Middle East. And if
Yes.
you were trying to inflate the price of oil, invading the Middle East is one way to do it. Attacking Iran is one way to do it, for example, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I can't disagree necessarily with the effect and what happened, because I did happen in real terms. I'm curious on your take. I mean, so if Trump is unsuccessful in doing this, because keep in mind, Trump is only going to be in power for 3 years. He may be able to make the relationship with Russia, and I actually hope he does. The notion that we are at odds seems absurd to me. So I hope he can make amends with Russia in this case. But he is rubbing up against China. He's rubbing up against the rest of the world. And he's even rubbing up against Europe at this point, where Europe is, there are articles coming out in Foreign Affairs, I think it's Foreign Affairs, saying the transatlantic relationship has effectively broken. I mean, do you see it that way? That this is
yes.
a change?
Yeah. Well, even if you listen to voices from out of Europe, they're now writing about the United States being an enemy openly. You could read. I think at some point in March or February, George Monbiot, the famous guy from The Guardian, who otherwise on some subjects comes across as very thoughtful and articulate, but he wrote this article which, if you follow George Monbiot, he has a certain style, he has a certain mindset. This fell very much outside of this mindset, and he was saying that, the United States is the enemy now, apparently, and we need to be prepared to fight against the United States. And it doesn't read like his style at all. So, which tells me that he's probably one of those journalists that gets a tap on the shoulder from the intelligence agencies and say, sign here, and you're publishing this article. And then he said, like, well, okay, that's the job. So he does. And then there are European politicians and public servants who are increasingly demonizing the United States in Europe, and start with Denmark over Greenland as well. And so this is very much real. And let's not forget that the United States became the republic that it was meant to be exactly as a reaction to these European oligarchic interests,
right,
who are essentially still ruling Europe. It's the facade is we're liberal democracies where the people are sovereign and they decide how their societies are going to evolve. But now we are finding out that that's not at all the case, that we are ruled by, we don't know exactly who, but it turns out it's probably exactly the same hereditary families that have ruled Europe 200 and 300 years ago, and that they have interests that are completely at odds with the interests of the ordinary people. And the most interesting episode in this is exactly the change from the Biden administration, the autopen administration, and Trump administration, because Trump almost immediately said, okay, Ukraine, we're done with this, right? We're done with this. And he called up Vladimir Putin, and the relations between Russia and the United States have been reestablished. By far, the most important bilateral relation in the world, determining the future of humanity, whether we go to peace and prosperity or nuclear Armageddon. Donald Trump picked up the phone and spoke with Vladimir Putin. And from there, we don't know how it ends, but at least they're talking.
Agreed.
So that's great.
But you don't think
And now but wait, here's where I'm going with this, because so far now, for decades, we have been given the impression that Europeans are simply being coerced by this evil empire, the United States, into following along into all these imperial misadventures in the Middle East, in the Oceania, in here and there, fighting these crazy wars because the crazy Americans are being so, warlike and violent and arrogant, and we're just being loyal allies, and we end up looking bad, but it's not because we want to, really. Well, now Trump says, okay, I'm done with Ukraine, and Europeans, instead of saying like, okay, that's over, now we can go back to peace and we can bring an end to this whole mess. No, they go absolutely hysterical, and they want to continue the war however they can. It's being led by Britain, France, Netherlands, and the Baltic states. Okay, the Baltic states probably are, going along with this, but the actual instigators of this in this order are Britain, France, and the Netherlands. And now you see that when the United States moved away, they're not just loyal followers of the big evil empire. They are the big evil empire. The United States was merely being their enforcement muscle.
Yeah, Europe went bananas. They went absolutely bananas.
It's surreal. It's surreal because they've been maintaining for decades. They've been maintaining this facade of innocence. Oh, we're just allies. We go along because we're loyal, because the United States is leading the way, and we disagree, but and now you see the reality.
It's like, oh, they're twisting our arm. It's like, they are going bananas, and they're doing any and everything to sabotage the peace deal. And
yes,
the fact that Witkoff wouldn't even disclose what they were talking about gets across like the ideological difficulty of even pushing it in that particular direction. Last question. Donald Trump is also an oligarch. And the people around him are also oligarchs. The Republican Party is about to put $20 trillion on the debt using this goofy mathematics in order to do it. It's going to be unfunded, and they're going to give that money effectively to the rich. And even the tariffs that they collect, we are going to have to pay those tariffs, where the rich are going to get kickbacks and tax cuts. And make it even worse, Trump is talking about putting 25% on pharmaceuticals. We already pay more for medicine than anywhere else in the world. Hasn't this boat of globalization left the barn? And ultimately, anything that Trump is going to have to do is going to have to work. I'm not against tariffs. I'm against the way he's using them, where it's just seemingly random and quote unquote instinctual in the way that he's effectively going about it. But they're effectively also oligarchs. These guys, like, whether they're in Europe or whether in the United States, this stuff is done specifically to benefit the rich. It's not for us.
You are absolutely right, Jamarl. They are oligarchs, but we are stuck with oligarchs. Now, that doesn't mean that we are stuck with gloom and doom and hopelessness, because throughout history, oligarchs have also been reformers. If you can go, you can trace the continuity of this system of governance back to the times of ancient Rome and even to Greek antiquity. And what you will find is that already in ancient Rome, you had the same pattern of events, of how a society basically eats itself and destroys itself under oligarchic rules, under the rule of the oligarchs. But then you also have other oligarchs who recognize this and who say, we are on the road to perdition. We need to change course. This is unsustainable. We're going to destroy the whole system. And then they try to rally the people to a cause of changing the course. And in Rome, there have been a whole series, dozens of these would-be reformers, most of whom by far have been oligarchs and aristocrats themselves,
Mhm.
like the Gracchi brothers, like Catiline, like Julius Caesar. They were all slaughtered. They were all
Yeah.
either exiled or slaughtered, along with thousands of their followers, because these oligarchies don't joke around. You know, they eliminate any influence that is jeopardizing their how do you call them,
The
their
rule.
privileges.
Yeah, the power.
So
Right.
and so this is, you know, they assassinated Abraham Lincoln. They assassinated Robert F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy. These are all also oligarchs, but who wanted to reform the system and change it, right?
It's fair.
If you take, for example, Elon Musk, I'm sure that he has his interests. I'm sure that he's not taken the vow of poverty and that he wants to make everybody else rich and himself poor. But you know, if your business is selling electric cars, do you agree with the idea of corralling people into 15-minute cities where they will have no need for your cars?
No.
Or do you want people to be prosperous and free so they can drive around and buy your cars? What I mean to say is that not every oligarch has the same incentives and the same motivations. Not all, you know, they're not a solid monolithic alliance of people who have money against people who have no money. You know, like, it's not that
Yeah.
all people with money are completely tight together against people who have no money.
It's not monolith.
So, but you know, it's I what I don't want to say with this is that, hey, let's relax because we're in good hands. Elon Musk and Donald Trump are going to fix things for us. No, you know, Donald Trump was swept into office by the will of the people, and I think that that same will of the people can steer Donald Trump in the direction that people want. What I mean to say by that is, rather than saying like, okay, we got him into the office, and now, you know, we watch and we make sure that we get what we deserve. No, I think you have to keep.
Push.
What do they say? That the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.
Yes.
We have to remain vigilant, and we have to continue to exert pressure on these people to deliver what we want. And they're not immune to these pressures. You know, even the hardcore dictators of this world are always afraid of the people. People power is extreme. Remember Alex Karp a few months ago when there were all these protests in over Gaza?
Yes.
And he was saying, if we lose the intellectual battle, we will not be able to deploy any Western army anywhere in the world. You know, and this is also why they are so extremely vexed about misinformation and disinformation, because they can't control the narrative, they can't control the will of the people, and because they are afraid of us. We are many, they are few. We have the power, they pretend to have the power. And so what I mean to say is that Donald Trump and his cabinet are going to go in the direction that people demand, if people demand and make their demands heard loud and clear. So, you know, we don't have to be afraid of the fact that they are oligarchs, that they're wealthy people. We don't have to assume that because they're oligarchs and they're wealthy, that they're our enemies automatically. And we have to never, ever, ever assume that we have no power, because we do.
Alex, you are fantastic. Thank you for this.
Oh, thank you very much,
I
Jamarlt.
really do
Very
appreciate
kind.
this conversation. I enjoyed this conversation. And I really hope
Likewise,
the audience
likewise.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And we have an actual really good crowd. So thank you for this. Alex Krainer.
Brilliant.
He is
Jamarlt,
founder.
thank you for having me. Warm greetings from Croatia to all your viewers and listeners. And until the next time.
Oh, you're in Croatia. Fair enough. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Alex Krainer. He's founder
Take care.
of Krainer Analytics and creator of iSystems Trend. iSystems Trend Following. He has worked as a market analyst, researcher, trader, and hedge fund manager since 1996. He has authored several books, including Mastering Uncertainty, Commodities Trading, and The Grand Deception, and Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. Thank you, my man. You be safe. Thank you for this.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
You have a good one. Bye.